Should hear it now.
Ready? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to St. George's Talks. Willkommen, meine Damen und Herren, und willkommen bei St. Georg's Gespräche. That's my little German introduction. The rest will now be in English. German because this is an ancient German church that we're standing in. St. George's in Whitechapel in London, a 250-year-old German Lutheran church, built by a German community of sugar refiners who brought a congregation here and filled this wonderful ancient building, grade 2 listed, still with many of its original furnishings and fittings, including the box pews and the ancient organ. It's a Lutheran church right in the centre of a Church of England diocese, a Lutheran in an Anglican world, in a sense, and that is an appropriate setting for this evening's talk. My name is Rick Jones. I didn't mention that at the start. I'm the chair of the committee that looks after this church, and talks are the monthly event, which one of the monthly events which now happen in this wonderful building. Each month a guest speaker appears, and it is my great pleasure this evening to welcome the guest speaker, who is, as the title of the talk is, a Lutheran in the Anglican Church. But our guest will explain more about that title and clarify a little the details around it. So will you welcome, please, this evening, the Revd Christoph Lindner, our guest this evening.
Thank you so much, Rick, for this introduction and for your excellent pronunciation of my name. Lindner is very difficult for British tongues. Either it's Lindner or Linder, but you've done it absolutely right. So thank you for that. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you for coming, and it's a real privilege to speak to you today. Here at St. George's, and those of us who are joining us wherever you are on Zoom. It's an honor for me to speak here today, not least because one of my heroes is the German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And I was really pleased to read, when I read up on the history of this church, that Dietrich Bonhoeffer, for a short time in 1935, actually preached in this church. I imagine in the pulpit, which you can't see because the screen is in front of it. Many of you will know that Dietrich Bonhoeffer was part of the resistance against Adolf Hitler, involved in the attempt to topple him in 1944, which failed. And so it's quite amazing to think that he, just 9 years before that, when he was a pastor in London, was also preaching here at St. George's. You may have found that in the wild, wonderful web that is the internet, sometimes we add 1 and 1 together and we come up with 3. And maybe that's what happened a little bit with information that was sent out about this event tonight. I'm afraid that might have happened a little bit with the talk that was advertised on the St. George's website, because it says a Lutheran minister in the Anglican Church. A Lutheran, yes. A minister in the Anglican Church, yes. But I need to start with a disclaimer. I'm not a Lutheran minister. So you can leave now if you're disappointed. I hope you're not. And I'll explain to you why hopefully I can still represent the Lutherans. It's coming back. I'll just pause so that our online guests can also be part of it. I hope we're back. Welcome back. I'll make sure I'm not muted. And I was just saying that I was ordained into the Church of England and only into the Church of England. But before you get too disappointed, let me explain. Because I was baptized in the Lutheran Church in Bavaria. And my father was a Lutheran minister in Bavaria. So I very much grew up in that tradition. And I was quite impressed, I don't know whether that was you, Imo, that the webmaster of the St. George's website found a picture somewhere on the internet of myself, my wife Edda, who is here, and my two parents, my father being a retired Lutheran minister, for advertising the event tonight. So if you go back to the website, and in fact I can show you in a minute, you will be able to see a proper Lutheran minister on that photo. And just so you know what I'm talking about, to save you having to find that image on the website, it is coming up in a moment. At the moment, just a screenshot, but now you should be able to see my parents together with my wife and myself in front of what is our home now, in front of St. Mary's Church in Denham. After my wife and I got married 30 years ago, we moved to Hamburg and we joined an independent Lutheran church there for 6 years. So my Lutheran roots do go deep. In the year 2000, we then moved to the UK after I had applied for a job as a musical director in a large Anglican church. That was our introduction to Anglicanism proper. So we moved to Buckinghamshire and we had planned to stay for 3 years. A little foreign adventure, as my wife might have put it, and then to move back to Hamburg. Someone has said, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. So here we are, 24 years later, and we are happily settled in the UK. We hold dual citizenship of Germany and the UK. And in 2012, I was ordained as a deacon in the Church of England, followed by my priesting a year later. My wife also studied a degree in theology, and she has worked in churches, especially in the area of children and families work. And then in 2016, 8.5 years ago, I was appointed as rector of St. Mary's Church, St. Mary the Virgin in Denham. Denham is right on the outskirts of London. Has anyone ever been to Denham here? Yay, Ulla has, and I'll explain in a minute why, or a bit later why. Well, Denham is bordering Uxbridge, which of course is part of Greater London. We can walk into Uxbridge. Although most people who live in Denham will tell you that they're not part of London. They are residents of Buckinghamshire, and they really don't like our Uxbridge postcode, UB9, because we are not. We're Buckinghamshire. When you live abroad, you do not only get to know the culture and customs of your new home, but also you see your culture of origin with fresh eyes and in a new light. The stereotypes they might have about you, the things you appreciate about the country that you grew up in, which you maybe never thought about while you lived there, but now that you live abroad, you begin to miss them. That was certainly the case for us in some areas of our life. When Edda and I grew up in Germany, we loved exploring new flavors and exotic cuisines, and only after living in the UK for a few years did we notice that we sometimes hankered after such delicacies as potato dumplings, Nuremberg sausages, sauerkraut, original Nuremberg gingerbread, and nothing comes close to it, or poppy seed cake. Now, you may have worked out from this list that I grew up in Franconia, Franken, of which Nuremberg is the biggest city. So just to mix things up a bit, I wonder which stereotypes about Germans come to your mind first. And please, if you would like to, just feel free to shout one out, and I might just repeat it for the sake of the microphone. And our Zoom guests, if you have worked out the chat feature, I'm sure Immo would love to hear from you on the chat what your typical German stereotypes are that come to mind. So, over to you.
Mercedes engineering.
Lovely. Mercedes engineering.
Love of order.
Love of order. You can't offend me. Carry on. Oktoberfest.
Jürgen von Manger hat gesagt, weil wir ja alle Streber sind.
I need to translate that now. That's difficult. Weil wir ja alle Streber sind. Because we're all swats. Lovely. That's a good collection already, isn't it?
Sausages.
Oh, thank you. Sausages. Absolutely right. Say again? Always on time. I'll tell you, we were in Germany recently and the trains are sadly never on time. And no one believed us when we came back. No, surely not. The trains are always running on time in Germany. They are not. At least not anymore if they ever did. Yes, exactly. Before my time, maybe they used to. Well, we soon found out, and that's reflected in some of your answers. Do we have any answers on the chat? Just so we... Oh, that was sausages. Thank you for the person online who contributed the sausages. Well, we soon found out that Germans are seen as highly efficient, very good at making cars and other technology. You will have heard the advertising slogan for, I'm going to anglicize it now so we understand it, Vorsprung durch Technik, or in German, Vorsprung durch Technik. And always put their towels on the beach chairs first. Have you heard that one? Yes. We never came across it until we actually moved to England. I'm sure it's not true, but it's firmly engrossed in the British psyche that German tourists always get there first, to the pool, to put their towels down. And of course, maybe you were too polite to actually mention this, that Germans do not have a sense of humor. Thank you for humoring me. Do not have a sense of humor. When I applied for the post of musical director in an Anglican church in early 2000, the rector then, who very much hoped that I would be successful with my application, told me that the one thing that I had to convince the interview panel of, more than any of my skills, was that I did have a sense of humor. Well, I must have done a reasonable job because I got the job. An English couple have a child. After the birth, medical tests reveal that the boy is normal, apart from the fact that he is German. This, however, should not be a problem. There is nothing to worry about. As he grows older, he dresses in lederhosen and has a pudding bowl haircut, but all his basic functions develop normally. He can walk, eat, sleep, read, and so on, but for some reason he never speaks. The concerned parents take him to the doctor, who reassures them that as the German child is perfectly developed in all other areas, there is nothing to worry about and that he's sure the speech faculty will come eventually. Years pass. The German child enters his teens, still not speaking, though in all other respects he's quite normal. One day when he's 17, his mother makes him a bowl of tomato soup and takes it through to him in the parlor. And minutes later, the young man appears in the kitchen and declares, "Mother, this soup is a little tepid." The mother is shocked. "All these years," she exclaims, "we assumed you couldn't speak, and yet all along it appears you could. Why? Why did you never say a word before?" "Because, Mother," he answers, "up until now, everything has been satisfactory." Quite often there is, of course, a grain of truth in the stereotypes of such jokes. Some years ago, I hosted a group of German ordinands training to be Lutheran ministers in Germany. They had a varied program, and we welcomed them in our church one afternoon, the first day of their trip. And after inquiring about their days so far, one of them said sadly that they were hoping to meet a bishop of the Church of England that morning, but sadly that bishop had to cancel. And then he said they would have preferred to meet the bishop rather than me. Well, I get that, but I was still slightly taken aback, and I replied with irony, "Well, thank you for appreciating me." To which one of them said, "Well, at least I'm honest." So maybe we should add a certain brash honesty to the list of typical German traits. I had always dismissed the stereotype of the humorless German until my wife and I were invited back to the church we were a part of in Hamburg some years later. And I gave several talks there. And after one of them, a friend of ours said to us, "Why do you always have to always start your talks with a joke?" Well, maybe there's a grain of truth in many stereotypes. I mentioned earlier that my father was a Lutheran minister, and I grew up in a little village in Upper Franconia, Oberfranken, between the cities of Bamberg and Nuremberg, in a beautiful area called Fränkische Schweiz, Franconian Switzerland, due to its limestone mountains that bear a certain resemblance. Our Lutheran church was a diaspora church, meaning that it was surrounded by Catholics, and there was this little enclave of Protestants in that part of Franconia. And those of you who know your German history will remember that Germany was a patchwork of small states and fiefdoms in the Middle Ages and up until 1871, when Germany was unified. And in the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, the principle was established that the ruler of a region determines the religion his subjects would follow, or in Latin, cuius regio, eius religio. And that is how the tiny little Lutheran enclave in Heiligenstadt in Upper Franconia came about. Incidentally, it was ruled by the Stauffenberg family, and you might have heard the name if you're interested in history, because that count was closely related to one of the would-be assassins of Adolf Hitler at the failed attempt in July 1944. His name was Klaus Schenk, Graf von Stauffenberg. The clear division into Catholics and Protestants, Lutherans in our case, was still very much alive when I was a child. Catholic parents would have been horrified if their son had brought home a Protestant bride, and vice versa. And I remember that RE was taught separately for Catholics and for Protestants in church. Once the Lutheran minister was ill, and our very enlightened teacher decided that the Catholic priest could just teach the whole class, no matter whether they're Catholics or Lutherans, which he did. At the end of the lesson, the priest encouraged us to say a prayer at the end. So we all dutifully folded our hands, which was when he pounced on me. I had interlaced my hands, as I was taught to pray as a little Lutheran boy, and he pointed at me and he said, "This is how we pray. Only old women with gout pray your way." Now that scared me, as you can imagine, as a 7-year-old boy. And of course, great strides have been made in Germany over recent decades in ecumenism, and Catholic and Protestant churches often work together very well. In fact, my father had very warm relationships with local Catholic priests where he was a minister. But it was still a matter of joy and gratitude for me, and we're finally getting to the Anglican minister bit now. It was a matter of joy and gratitude for me when some years ago I went to a Christian conference here in the UK, and I got talking to another Anglican priest, and we were swapping notes, as it were. I found out he also grew up in Germany, but he had grown up Catholic, I had grown up Lutheran, and yet here we were, both ordained as ministers in the Church of England. And that is one of the blessings of being a broad church, a national church, a church that views itself as standing in the unbroken apostolic succession going all the way back to St. Peter, as the Roman Catholic Church does. And I guess our greater affinity with the Roman Catholic traditions also means we are a little bit closer to Roman Catholics than Protestant churches, as I experienced again recently at a study trip to Rome. That is, of course, not to say that the deep divisions of the past do not still echo in the present. On several occasions, I welcomed visitors to our church, St. Mary's in Denham, and people said to me, "You know, I'm a Catholic. And do you know that this was once our church?" To which my usual reply is, "It still is. You are very welcome here." Our church, St. Mary the Virgin in Denham, goes back to at least 1123, when we have the first historic record. So we celebrated our 900th, or at least 900th anniversary last year. And the Reformation under Henry VIII was, of course, a big cataclysm for our church, as it was for churches up and down the country in England. When the monasteries were dissolved, the abbess of Sion Abbey in West London was retired, as every other abbot or abbess, and she was retired to a manor house in Denham. And when she died, she was buried at St. Mary's. So I'm going to now share some slides again. I'm just telling you because I'll need a moment so that everyone in the church and online will be able to see. And I hope Imo will tell me in a moment whether he can see the slide. Can you see the slide in the church?
Yes.
You can. The abbess of Sion Abbey was buried right in front of the altar, the communion table, and we still have a brass commemorating her, and this is a brass rubbing of the brass in St. Mary's Church. The upheavals of the Reformation also led to a curious discovery when the church was renovated some years ago. On one of the walls, there was a brass remembering the daughter of the first church patron. She died quite early, and so the patron commissioned a beautiful brass of his daughter, which was proudly displayed on one of the church walls. She was the daughter of Sir Edmund Peckham. He was the lord of the manor and the first patron of St. Mary's during Henry VIII's reign. He's buried in the sanctuary, and you can still see the effigy of him and his wife on the left of the altar in St. Mary's. Now, when the brass commemorating Sir Edmund's daughter was taken down as part of the renovation process, it was discovered that on the reverse there was an earlier brass. Here are two brass rubbings, the daughter on the right and the earlier one on the left. And it turned out the earlier one was that of a Franciscan monk. The brass had been reused on the other side. It's in technical language a palimpsest, which you know from manuscript language. And because the monk was now literally facing the wall and not visible to the public, he was hidden from sight, and this was probably the reason why that brass survived the time when any signs of popery were often removed and destroyed. What an incredible story. Here is the original brass now in a new wooden frame as it is displayed in St. Mary's Church. Some years ago, Berlitz language schools ran a brilliant advert, and it was showing a young German Coast Guard officer. During his shift, he receives an SOS call. "Mayday, Mayday, can you hear us? We are sinking." The young man replies, "Hello, this is the German Coast Guard." Sorry for my bad German accent. This is what some people think a German accent sounds like, and they do that in the advert. Again, the desperate call from the sinking ship. We are sinking, sinking. After a short pause, the reply, yes. What are you thinking about? Language matters. Thinking and sinking are very different. And sometimes the same word can mean different things to different people. When I was exploring ordained ministry, having lived in the UK for some years, one of the stumbling blocks for me was the concept of a priest. As I said to you, my Lutheran DNA goes deep. And my Lutheran theology meant that I was passionate about what Lutherans call the priesthood of all believers. And that a church that is too priest-centered, too priest-focused, might find it hard to flourish in the long term. I also objected to the pre-Reformation concept of the priest somehow being a mediator between people and God who makes sacrifices on their behalf in the Eucharist. But as I explored the concept of Christian priesthood more, I made a wonderful discovery that this idea of a priest making sacrifices on behalf of the people is more akin to a pagan priest, or sacerdos in Latin. Whereas the word priest originally comes from the Greek word presbyter. That's where you get your Presbyterians from. And presbyter literally means elder, an elder in the church. And the word is attested in the New Testament. And that is a concept I was able to embrace wholeheartedly. An elder who helps the community to become spiritually mature and to serve other people in the spirit of Jesus. So, what has it been like to become an Anglican priest as a Lutheran? Well, my overriding sense is that there is so much more that unites us than divides us. And that is so important to say in a world that I believe is getting increasingly fractured and fractious, where people identify with their particular tribe and make a judgment on who is in and who is out. At the heart of the Christian message is reconciliation. And being the established church in this country means that we are called to serve everyone in our parish and beyond. At a Christian leadership conference a few years ago, one of the keynote speakers was Cardinal Raniero Cantalamessa, who has been the preacher to the papal household since 1980. As you can guess from that date, he's not a young whippersnapper anymore. He's a wonderful, gracious man. And when he talked about faith and grace, he exclaimed, "Protestants, stop protesting. We are agreed on this." Now, some theologians might argue that we still have some subtly different positions, but there is so much more that unites us than divides us. And this includes the closeness of our liturgies, Catholics, Lutherans, Anglicans, which I noted again during a recent retreat at a Jesuit retreat centre in North Wales, which my father commented on repeatedly when they came to visit us, took part in services. There is so much that unites us. While Lutheran ministers may still wear a cassock and preaching tabs when leading a service, most of them would be indistinguishable when they go about their daily round. Whereas I am marked out by my clergy collar when I'm out and about as a priest. Someone has said that wearing our collar in public makes us a public sign of the possibility of God. I like that. In my case, it sometimes leads to heckles and sometimes to really positive encounters. Once I remember I was in a hospital lift and one of the nurses there in the lift said, "Father, could you pray a blessing over me?" What a lovely thing to be able to do in the public square. And in fact, my father has said he sometimes envies me for this visibility as a priest. There is a wideness in our Anglican ecclesiology, in our understanding of what the church is and how we worship, which has been liberating for us. There are different ways of worshipping God in our church, but we all belong together. I found a deeper way of engaging with history, with tradition, of cherishing the early church fathers and pre-Reformation theology that can sometimes be lost or at least missing to a degree in Protestant churches. And of course, the Anglican communion is a worldwide communion. It is especially strong in countries that formerly belonged to the British Empire and now the Commonwealth. And we are enriched by what they contribute. Enriched quite literally, as increasing numbers of priests in the Church of England originate from Africa and Asia. Now, I do, of course, realize there is a Lutheran World Federation, and it also gives Lutherans an international horizon, but in my experience, it is less visible and hasn't got such a strong influence on our sense of identity. I believe one of the besetting sins of Protestantism is a tendency to protest and split. If we disagree about something we feel strongly about, we part ways and we form separate churches. The joke is told of a Methodist who is stranded on a desert island. Years later, he's finally rescued by a passing ship. And when his rescuers explore the island, they notice that he has built not one, but 2 chapels on the island. They ask him, why did you do that? You are the only living person on this island. And he says, well, you see, this one is the chapel I belong to. That one is a chapel I do not belong to. Unity is a great value in our Christian faith. And in fact, Jesus prays in John 17 that his followers may be one. But as Anglicans and as Lutherans, we are also confessional churches who cannot sacrifice our deepest convictions for the sake of unity at all cost or for the lowest common denominator. And there are times when our unity is stretched to the limits and may break. If you've followed the headlines about the Church of England over the last years, you may know that we are at another one of those breaking points at the moment. But we are striving to keep the unity and to stay together. And as a vicar, I need to get used to those tensions. There is no way around it as someone leading a local church. They're built into my job description. Let me just mention a few to you to give you an idea of my daily job and the tensions it involves. For much of the time, I'm acting largely as someone who's self-employed, who leads a small business. And at the same time, I'm, of course, under the authority of our bishop and cooperate closely with the elected church wardens and the elected church council. On the one hand, I'm heading up church governance and administration. On the other hand, I'm available as pastor to everyone in the parish, irrespective of their belief or their lack of belief. And this can be difficult. For example, when I have to enforce diocesan churchyard rules and someone hasn't complied with them with a monument they want to set up. It's difficult. Church can feel a bit like a club for the members, and it is so important that we have deep bonds between the members of the church. But at the same time, we have a mission to reach out beyond the core congregation to those who are not part of our community. In the words of Robert Putnam, who wrote a really interesting book in 2000 called Bowling Alone, where he identified already the loneliness sickness in his day in America, which has only got worse. We need both bonding and bridging glue. The bonding glue that holds us together as a community and the bridging glue that helps us to reach out beyond our community. As a parish church, we also play a civic role in national occasions such as the death of our late Queen and the coronation of Prince Charles, now King Charles, and we host the annual service of remembrance on Remembrance Sunday. At my first such service as rector in Denham, I was told that some members of the community were querying whether it was a good idea that a German vicar was leading the national commemoration of this important day. And I understand that when you are a veteran who has lived through World War II and have deep wounds from that time, that you might struggle with that idea. Well, I'm happy to report that all went well on that first Remembrance Sunday. And it is another opportunity to build bridges and to overcome the conflicts of the past. Another tension is that as a vicar, I'm called to safeguard that tradition of the church that stretches back many centuries. Yet in my ordination vows, I promise to proclaim the faith afresh in every generation. We are to look after our beautiful historic church building, and you won't be surprised to hear that it costs a lot of money to do that. What you may not know is that local parish churches do not get any financial help unless they apply to a lottery fund, etc., but have to pay for the upkeep of their local churches from the funds that are donated by church members. And yet, we need to ensure that our churches do not merely become museums, or as someone has put it, empty palaces of a long-forgotten king. A few weeks ago, we introduced a video projector and screen in our 900-year-old church, which gives us so much more flexibility in a visual age. We're using visual aids in this beautiful historic church. We've done this in sympathy with the architecture. We're using it as sensitively as we can. But such measures will always cause a certain amount of tension. And I'm so grateful that we have a church family that are willing to embrace such changes and not to simply do what we've always done. On a typical Sunday at St. Mary's, you will find a service which is led by an organist and a robed choir, but it also includes an action song for children and one or two modern worship songs led by piano and guitar. So can I invite you to come on a virtual tour of St. Mary's in Denham? I've talked about it a lot. Let me take you into the church. And I want to start with a short video sequence which literally flies you into the church. We put this together for our online community carol service in 2020. We couldn't pack the church because of COVID. So let me share my screen again and see that hopefully it'll all work as it should. Let's see whether we can take that flight. Can you see it?
Yes.
So this is done with a drone. This is the cockerel on top of our church tower. It was during dusk or dawn, I can't remember, and now we're moving down. You can see our Norman church tower, and now we're flying towards the lit main door with a stained glass window on top. We're entering through the west door. We're stepping in now. The church is lit with candles. You can see the Christmas tree on the left. And for our carols by candlelight, that is what you would find in our church. And we only turn on the main lights when we need to see the words of the carols. And this is our chancel area where the choir sing. Now we're moving to the sanctuary. And our altar is very handy because it's hollow inside. And for Christmas, we turn it around 180 degrees and we turn it into a Christmas crib with what we call a nativity, because a member of our church knitted the nativity figures and we display them during Advent and Christmas. Now, you've just come through the west door, which is the usual way in which today people would come through our church, into our church. However, before the new organ was built and an organ balcony was put in, the ringing chamber for our bell ringers would have been on the ground floor. So while they were ringing, it would have been impossible to actually come through that door. Here is a picture of the bell ringers in 1948. There are 8 bell ringers, so one for each of the 8 bells we have at St. Mary's. And a very popular shot for wedding couples who got married at St. Mary's was the couple standing in front of that door, surrounded by the bell ringers and their robes. What a beautiful shot. In fact, the groom on the photo was the bell captain, the tower captain for many years. Well, historically, for that reason, people would have come in through the south door, where you can still find our font. This is what you see when you step through the south door. And there is a reason why the font is there. Although these days it means that many in church can't actually see baptisms very well, as there is a pillar right next to it. Historically, you may know, in Anglican churches and I believe Roman Catholic churches, a font had to be near the main entrance, because it symbolizes that we enter the Christian life through baptism. So parents would have come through that door when they brought their newborn, and the newborn would have baptized right there behind the entrance of the church. The font was made from Purbeck marble in the 13th century and has a Victorian oak cover. And we use this font today, as was done in many of the centuries past. And we baptize little children and we baptize adults in this same font. The font cover, made, as I say, of oak and from Victorian days, has 8 corners, symbolizing the fact that the world was created in 6 days, God rested on the 7th, and the 8th corner stands for the eternal day, which makes a great connection to one of the treasures in our church, which was discovered when the church was redecorated in the first half of the 20th century. Above the south door, through which you would have come in, there is a fresco, a mural depicting the Last Judgment. Sadly, it has been damaged somewhat by the ravages of time, but you can still see what was a very popular image in the Middle Ages in many churches. And it helps to compare it with a better preserved painting to see the bits that are missing, that are not there anymore. This one is a painting of the Last Judgment by Hans Memling from the second half of the 15th century. And when you compare the two, you can see on the right side that the feet of Christ rest on a golden orb. On the left-hand side, what looks like a crown above the head of the angel is actually Jesus's feet, where the red arrow is, touching that orb. Sadly, the upper half of Christ has been lost in our fresco. And you can also just about see that Christ is sitting on a rainbow, as he does in the painting. And here is the arrow showing you a bit of the arc of the rainbow that Christ is sitting on. Only few people were able to read in the Middle Ages. And so paintings and frescoes were the poor man's Bible. The Lutheran church I grew up in had 2 balconies. Here is the church in Heiligenstadt in Franconia. And you can just see the edges of the 2 balconies on the edges of our photo. On the first level, it told Old Testament stories. On the second upper level, it told New Testament stories. I was fascinated by them as a child. And it helped me through boring services because I had something interesting to study. It's always lovely to welcome German visitors to St. Mary's and to give them a tour of our church. They tend to be surprised to find an Anglican vicar who comes from Germany and speaks fluent German. And in fact, the person you can blame for me speaking here today is with us today. It's Ulla Thiessen. She often guides German tourist groups, and often St. Mary's features on your itinerary. And Ulla, you gave a talk earlier here at St. George's, I believe, in January on Hans Holbein. And the talk is still available on YouTube on the website of St. George's Church. So thank you, Ulla, for recommending me as a speaker. One of Ulla's favorite tours is the Inspector Barnaby tour, better known in this country as Midsomer Murders. And St. Mary's has featured in several episodes of the program, most notably in the episode called Death in Chorus, just in case there is a Midsomer Murders fan here. Mrs. Barnaby sings in the church choir, and there are lovely shots of St. Mary's interior in that particular program. I'm afraid to say there's also several murders in our churchyard as part of that episode. you do have to wonder that there's anyone still alive in the county of Midsomer, I must say. Denham is famous for its film studios, historic film studios, which in recent years were converted into apartments. And in past years, a fair few film and TV stars used to live in the village, including Roger Moore, Paul Daniels, Robert Lindsay, Cilla Black, and of course, John Mills, who lived right next to our church, and he and his wife are buried in our churchyard. And if you're a fan of the Miss Marple films from the 1960s, starring Margaret Rutherford, you will find Miss Marple's cottage from the films in Denham. Oh, that's helpful, isn't it? I will reshare my screen so that everyone who's online can also benefit from the images. Thank you, Imo. Did we miss out on all the other lovely slides? I do apologize. Yeah. Okay, we'll go back and hopefully we can now see it. Excellent. So this is Miss Marple's cottage from Margaret Rutherford's films, which is in the village of Denham. Well, I'm coming into land. One of the earliest appearances of St. Mary's in post-war films I know about, where St. Mary's is actually renamed as St. Mark's, is in the 1960s program called Our Man at St. Mark's, starring Leslie Phillips and later Donald Sinden as the Reverend Andrew Parker. Here he is. Sadly, almost all of the episodes have been lost, but I found a little clip that you see now on Facebook, which allows us in a moment to enter the doors of St. Mary's Church. It is not St. Mark's, it's St. Mary's, but for the sake of the film, it was renamed. And this allows us now, together with the Reverend Andrew Parker, aka Leslie Phillips, to enter the doors of St. Mary's one last time. Well, I was interested to read that recently a Lutheran congregation has started holding a regular service again. Did you know that, Rick? On a Sunday here in St. George's Church. There is a Lutheran English-speaking church which recently have started meeting again at St. George's, which is lovely. And I thank God that today St. Mary's in Denham is not just a TV curiosity or a museum, but the home of a vibrant church family and a resource for the whole local community. And with the local church family of St. Mary's, I'm trying to do my bit to ensure that this will still be true in 99 years when we celebrate the 1000th anniversary of St. Mary's Church, when hopefully we will still welcome visitors, not me, but the church will welcome visitors from all around the world, including Germans, maybe some Lutherans too. Well, thank you for being such a warm and welcoming audience.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Christoph. Would anyone like to ask any questions of the Reverend? It occurred to me, if you had been a minister, a Lutheran minister, and you'd wished to become an Anglican minister instead, would there have been a procedure to go through, or would it simply have been a question of switching?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Thank you. There have been attempts over the last decades for churches to come together to find meeting places. You may know that in the established historic churches, Christian baptism is recognized across the churches, no matter whether you're baptized as a Roman Catholic or a Lutheran or an Anglican. It's a bit more difficult with ordination. I know there is the so-called Porvoo agreement with Scandinavian Lutheran churches, which recognizes our respective ordinations. So if I were, say, a Norwegian Lutheran minister, I could minister as a minister in the Church of England and vice versa. There's also a Meissen agreement, named after the East German city of Meissen, which has tried to come together as much as we can, but I don't want to misrepresent this here and online. I believe it is relatively easy to switch, but whether there's a little process, I would have to read up on. Much more difficult to become a Catholic priest, although when the ordination of women as bishops happened in the Church of England, there were some Anglicans who felt that was a step too far for them. And so a new group of Anglican churches was formed called the Ordinariate in the Roman Catholic Church, which is a subgrouping within the Roman Catholic Church in England. And if an Anglican priest decided they wanted to leave the Church of England, join the Roman Catholic Church, the special permission was given that these former Anglican, now Roman Catholic priests may remain married. So that's a nice little thing for the next quiz question, for your next pub quiz.
Very good. Anyone else?
Any other questions? Don't be shy. We've got a few more minutes.
In Bamberg.
Just wondering if you've been there and you take the group along.
Yeah, really, really interesting question. I followed a little bit. So the question was that you were at the Kirchentag in Nuremberg, in fact, last year or a couple of years ago. The Kirchentag is a national church gathering of all the established Protestant churches in Germany from the different state churches. And it happens, I believe, every other year, I think that's right, in different cities across the country. And it's a wonderful celebration of the life of the church and beyond. There's special services, there's discussion groups, there's arts groups, there's special theatre performances. I've been to a few in my time. In fact, my first experience of the Kirchentag was as a 13-year-old boy when the Kirchentag was in Hamburg, I believe in the year 1981. And it was a wonderful experience for me. No, I didn't go last time. And we have not taken a group across to Germany, which is a really interesting thought, whether there might be an appetite in our community. I think one of the barriers would be that typically, not to put too fine a point on it, Germans speak better English than English people speak German. And so I think there would be a language barrier, and we'd have to see how we would overcome that. So there you go. Some sessions have English translation, which makes it a lot easier. Thank you. Really? Yeah. No hindrance at all. Yeah. Are you a regular, if I may ask? Have you been to quite a few? Lovely. It also gets you around the country and you see interesting cities, don't you? Yeah. Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Christoph. It's interesting for me that you come from Franconia. Friends of ours, the husband was a pastoral reverend, I think, in the Catholic Church, in Himmelberg. I'm not sure how far it is.
Yeah.
We went with them on holiday to the North Germany, and I remember going to the Lutheran churches there. My wife went interested, so she would go to Paul to see what the texts were and things like that, and she was told that was certain service. She shouldn't be called it. I'm not sure whether there's a particular sensitivity around who should be for. The other thing I might mention is that you mentioned Bamberg earlier on, and noticed that the tourist organisation, which specialise in churches, take care of organising their trip every year, and put some footsteps and going to sites associated with his last 3 weeks. So people here might be interested in
Very much.
Thank you very much. Just to repeat briefly for our listeners online, do you think it was loud enough, Immo?
I
think so.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, North Germany Lutheran churches, I do apologise on behalf of my North German Lutheran brethren and sisters that your wife wasn't allowed in the pulpit. The minister has the right to decide who's allowed to preach, because as a minister I have the corporeal ownership of the church as long as I'm a vicar. Same in the Anglican church. I'm being given the keys when I'm being licensed. So yes, technically the ministers can decide who gets into the pulpit or not, but I think it's just a bit silly, isn't it? Because it's quite an experience. I would love to go up to this pulpit where Bonhoeffer stood, certainly. Now, I'm an Anglican minister, but why shouldn't you? And have the wonderful view from up there. The second statement, just briefly to say, really interesting that McCabe Travel, which is a travel organisation specialising in pilgrimages and Christian holidays, are doing a special trip in the footsteps of Bonhoeffer next year. And that's certainly something that I would love to do at some point. He's the most interesting person. Just a little story that I'm reminded of. When Edda and I were dating and engaged to be married, we read a beautiful book, which was actually the letters written between Bonhoeffer and his then fiancée, that he wrote to her from prison and she wrote back to him to prison. Moving letters, deeply showing the humanity of Bonhoeffer. And of course, they never got the joy of marrying because he was executed before that. Imo.
We have a question online, but just before we do that one, I can mention to the last point.
Yeah.
There was a recording of Songs of Praise in this church in about 2006, on which the music director from the BBC, who happened to be an old school teacher of mine, stood right up there in the pulpit to conduct everyone.
Beautiful.
So Cheryl Corney asks, would you be allowed to serve as a minister in a Lutheran church if you returned to Germany?
Yeah, so I think there's probably reciprocal arrangements, and Lutherans is probably the easiest of the lot in the Protestant church, because there's different flavours in the Protestant church in Germany, and we're probably closest to the Lutherans. I certainly would be invited by many of my Lutheran colleagues to lead a service or to preach. The question arose because a member of our family asked the question the other day whether I would be allowed to conduct their marriage service. And I said to her, I need to take advice on that, because I don't know how far the permission would go. So I've asked a friend of mine who is an area dean in the church in Germany whether that would be possible. He hasn't replied yet. He's probably still looking for the answer. And as you know, canon law and other laws are quite complicated. So I imagine there would be a certain process of re-familiarizing myself with the processes and the ordinal and all the other things in the Lutheran church. But I would hope it would be quite easy. I remember in the church where I grew up in Heiligenstadt in Franconia, they actually employed a minister who was an English Anglican minister, and he then became a fully fledged Lutheran minister. So it can't have been that complicated. And coming back to your story about the Lutheran church in North Germany, for Catholics, they're often really surprised and positively surprised that certainly the Anglican lectionary, which gives us the regular readings for each Sunday, and the Roman Catholic lectionary, I believe the Lutheran lectionary as well, they are aligned. And it's a lovely thing to think that on a Sunday we read the same readings in the different churches.
Very good.
Well, I think we've run out of time. We've done our hour.
Yes, so shall I just wrap up then? Thank you very much, Christoph, once again. That was a most interesting talk. Showed the differences, the comparisons between the church here and in Germany for one thing, but also gave us some great insight into your parish at Denham. I didn't realise it was quite as historic as it is. Wonderful pictures that you showed. I was reminded before this talk began of a poem by John Donne, which actually I quoted in part of the literature before, but it compares the two churches. Show me, dear Christ, thy spouse so rich and clear. The spouse of Christ is, of course, the church, traditionally. What? Is it she which on the other shore goes richly painted, i.e. the Catholic Church in France, southern Europe, or which, robbed and tore, laments and mourns in Germany and here? So that in that poem, the church in England, the Protestant church, Anglican of course, and the church in Germany, the Lutheran church, are seen as being similarly what would one say, not the richly painted version, but the rather more modest, plain crosses, simple worship of the Protestant strain in religion. So that ties it all to an end. In a month's time, there is a talk which actually fits the theme. You've had murders in your church.
Purely fictional, I hasten to add.
Of course. The talk in next month in November is about the first railway murder that happened in this country. And I think probably that's the first railway murder anywhere in the world. I'm not entirely sure about that, but the first railway murder. And the relevance to this church is that the accused was a German national, and the pastor here, Reverend Kappel, who was here in the 1880s, was the translator at the court case. So there is that connection. And it also celebrates 200 years since the first railway commercial journey took place from Stockton to Darlington up in northeast England. So there's one of our normal talks. There's a relevance to it in German personalities involved and history in terms of the railway, but that's in a month's time. And then, of course, at the beginning of the month, we have the regular organ vespers, the first Saturday of the month, which is always a fun event. You get to sing a German Lutheran hymn, music provided, so it's a sight reading exercise as well, visiting organists playing this wonderful antique instrument that we have here. And you are all welcome, both online and here in the church this evening. And we're going to conclude here with a glass of wine and a piece of cake at the back. And I know Christoph is very anxious to get his hands on the organ here, as he's already revealed. He is a musician and was employed in the Church of England. So that is what we're going to do. Those of you at home, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again online. And those of you in the church here, thank you for coming, and please do join us now at the back of the church for a glass of wine. Let us just give a round of applause to Christoph for his wonderful talk. Thank you very much.